This is a lecture from OpenTuition. To benefit from the lecture, you should download the free lecture notes from opentuition.com.
Chapter 2 deals with organisational structure. And organisational structure covers both the shape of the organisation and also how people are managed and how the shape can influence how people are managed. The first structure we look at is very, very common indeed, and this is often what you'll see in organisation charts in organisations. And it's called a functional structure. Basically it means that each function of the organisation has a different department. So you would have typically at the top, as we see here, the Chief Executive Officer, and then within the finance function or finance department, it would be headed up by a finance director, and then under the finance director there would be a chief accountant, and then you would have maybe a number of more junior accountants, maybe somebody for financial accounting, somebody for management accounting, somebody for the receivables ledger, somebody for wages and salaries and so on, and so it goes on down. Similarly, for sales you'd have a sales director typically, and then it might be divided into area managers, north of the country, south of the country and so on, and then you'd have the individual sales staff. Sometimes they may divide this function into sales and marketing and so on. There are different details that can be going through. And then IT, the operations manager, the programmers, the analysts, production director, you have factory manager or factory managers if there's several factories, maybe somebody looking after the warehouse as well, and then you'd have the workforce. Then you have your human resources people, health and safety, training, keeping records and so on within that. This line of control from top to bottom is known as a scalar chain. So what tends to happen is commands get passed down the scalar chain, and some sort of information tends to be referred up the scalar chain. But these are basically the lines of communication up and down within the organisation. There are two main decisions to make when you are creating the functional structure. It is what departments should be recognised. So, for example, should you have a separate production department and a warehousing department? Should you have a separate sales department and marketing department and the like? And then secondly is how many layers should there be? How many grades almost of employees should there be? We'll come on to that in a moment. But before that, let's just think of why this functional structure is so common. And of course, one reason is it's just logical. There is a logic to having all of your finance function within one department, all of the financial operations within one department. Everyone knows where to go to get a question about finance sorted out. Within this department, you can have a great level of expertise in here. You have a finance director who's well qualified and well experienced, chief accountants again, well qualified, well experienced and so on. Everyone within this department, if you like, is from a similar background, speaks the same kind of language and terminology, and you get great economies of scale. Every finance related transaction is going to go through this department. Similarly in sales, you have everyone of a similar background, similar motivation, indeed similar skills together. So any telephone comes through inquiring about sales, you know immediately who to put it through because everything's in that one department. So you get great levels of expertise, it's logical, and you get great economies of scale from it. Why will, as we'll see, anyone perhaps go for any other sort of organisation or any sort of organisational structure? And we'll see that tends to come with increasing size. Once organisation gets very large, then what you can have is, for example, let's say the production director, let's say you're in charge of a very large workforce, maybe of 2,000 people. Now this production director is quite a powerful person. If you're in charge of 2,000 people, you're quite a prince within the kingdom, really. And what happens is sometimes these people become a bit obstructive. Power almost goes to their head. They begin to think their function is to look after their department and its efficiencies, without really recognizing that they're part of a larger whole. And you can imagine how a sales director might come to this production director and say, look, I have a new order coming in from a new client, new customer. Could you perhaps interrupt your present production schedule and make a special order for this new customer? Because if we please this new customer, then I'm sure we're going to get lots more orders from them. And the production director feels powerful enough to say, no, I am not going to disrupt my 2,000 people here and get them working in something else for a day. I'm not going to put up with all of those inefficiencies and so on here. You'll just have to wait your turn. So very large subsections or departments or functions within an organisation, sometimes as a power almost goes to the head, they think, I'm going to look after myself and my workforce rather than looking after the biggest organisation. The second reason, also coming from size, we'll see this when we get on to divisionalisation, is that as organisations grow, they will, instead of just serving their home market, let's say the European market, they will begin maybe serving the American market, maybe the Asian market and so on. And to what extent does it make sense to have, for example, all sales going through one functional department? Because the products and the selling techniques and the competition are going to be quite different between Europe, America and Asia. Anyway, we'll come on to how this develops in a moment. But the next one we're going to look at is how many layers should there be? How many supervisors, managers, assistant managers, senior managers and so on should there be? And there are two main extremes, I suppose, here. The first is what is called a tall, narrow structure. Here we have a very kind of stylized tall, narrow structure. Each manager or supervisor looks after only two other people directly. So this one looks after two people directly and so on. And this is what's called a span of control. And here it's equal to 2. Only two people directly report to me. There are many layers. Obviously, not many people reporting to you. If you have so we've got quite a few kind of layers in here. And quite a lot of disadvantages. We've got a few advantages, but quite a lot of disadvantages to this sort of structure. First of all, a span of control of 2 means that I, as a manager, can look after my two immediate subordinates for 2.5 days a week. I say looking after them, but what I might actually mean is interfere with what they're doing for 2.5 days a week. Really, they can do the work, and because there's only 2 of them, I can always redo it. So the delegation which goes on, where delegation is passing down a responsibility to people below you, the delegation mightn't be very good or very efficient because I can redo it. And this is one of the reasons why this tall, narrow structure has become less, I suppose, less common over the last 20 years, because people began to think, what are these people in the middle doing? We had managers looking after assistant managers, looking after senior supervisors, looking after supervisors, looking after assistant supervisors. There's people kind of pushing paper around, redoing the work. Repetitive kind of nature to it isn't maybe very cost effective. Another reason why this has moved out of favour a little bit is you had all these layers in here, and each layer would tend to have what I would call a certain salary, but also certain perks, certain rights. A certain layer would have an office of a certain size, or be entitled to maybe a certain sort of car or reserved car parking space and so on. And if you began to try and move these people around a little bit to get a bit more flexibility, people would dig their heels in and say, no, I'm layer 3.2 or something. I'm not going to be put in with layer 3.1 and have the same sort of perks and so on there. They would look after very jealously their grades, and this meant that flexibility wasn't great. And then perhaps the final main reason why it's become less popular is that the world is changing faster. Both technology and competition, new products and so on, changing very quickly. It used to be the guy at the top, or the person at the top, who maybe been there 10 years, really had expertise because things didn't change very much. You'd be making really the same washing machine now, more or less, you'd been making 10 years ago. Now, with technology and marketing changing, the person at the top, their knowledge, great though it might be out of date. It might be the new person coming in at the bottom who knows more about, say, the use of social media, like Twitter and Facebook and so on, as marketing techniques. This person will have heard of those, but may never really use it, may not have bought into it. And this person needs to know about new stuff. And on the conventional, tall, narrow structure, the way in which it would be communicated would be kind of going up through one layer to the next layer and so on, up through all of these intermediaries, all of whom maybe put their spin on the message, all of whom maybe slow down the message. And then it kind of comes back down again, taking a few days or even a few weeks at each stage. And again, everyone puts their own interpretation on it. So what is actually said by the person at the bottom can be really very different and very delayed by the time it gets to the person at the top. And it was found that this really didn't work very well in faster moving environments where companies need to be flexible and need to be able to move very quickly and to stay up to date. So there's a great movement towards this, a wide flat. So here what we have, I think, is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. In this one here we have a span of control of 9. So any supervisor is looking after far more people, typically 9, 10, 12 maybe. Now this means that the delegation has to be better. It maybe means that your employees have to be better, because your supervisor can't hold your hand to the same extent. The supervisor, if you're looking after 10 people, you have a maximum of half a day per person to look after and supervise them. And it's got your own work to be getting on with. So better supervision, better delegation, better people are probably needed. But it means also that people are much more flexible. This is a much more egalitarian type of situation. There isn't a big gap between the person at the top and the person at the bottom. It's everyone kind of in together, really, to get the job done. Any communication is going to be much faster between top and bottom, and so on. It's going to be much easier to get people to work with other people, to be much more flexible, because you aren't saying, I'm grade 3.2, I'm not going to be working with grade 3.1. You're all in it together. And also it saves costs. So there's a great movement from the tall narrow down to the wide flat. Now, were there any advantages in this kind of tall narrow tall? And the main advantage comes if you actually have to have close supervision. So if you're working in, say, an oil refinery or a chemical works or nuclear power station, where the consequences of something going wrong are very high, then you need to be closely monitored. Or perhaps in a hospital where you have a junior doctor. The junior doctor has to be properly supervised to make sure they don't come to the wrong diagnosis. If, however, there's less at stake, if it's a simpler process which is going on, so it's less likely there's going to be mistakes made, and if the consequences of mistakes are less serious, if life is not involved, then you can more safely move to this wide, flat sort of organisation. and in a way trust that these people are going to make the right decision. And anyway, if they don't, it's not going to be a disaster. So, tall, narrow to wide, flat. We have in your notes then we have got the full list of advantages and disadvantages. For example, it says in here that if you're in this tall, narrow structure, there are lots of opportunities for little bits of promotion and so on here, which is very nice, seeing yourself climbing up the career path. Disadvantages, each little bit of promotion might be relatively trivial, but nevertheless, it's marking out how you're getting on in the organisation. Whereas maybe in wide, flat, it's going to be a big promotion. Suddenly, from down here, you're going to be put up to here, in charge of 9 people. It's a big thing. It's not going to happen very often. You have to wait maybe a long time for a promotion. When it does happen, it's a big jump in responsibility. And sometimes the promotion happens, and then you find the person isn't really up to it. But as I say, the full advantages and disadvantages are kind of noted there in your notes. Divisional structure. Getting back to why people would divert away from a simple functional structure. As organizations grow, they inevitably diversify. For example, European, American and Asian markets. And it makes very little sense to have everything going through the one set of departments. So if you're selling to America, you need to know what advertising is going to work there. You need to know what prices are being charged by your competitors. You need to know the strength of your competitors. And to some extent, you need to know what's legal in that country. There can be different health and safety laws. Say, for example, if you're selling cars or pharmaceuticals, you have to become a specialist in your market. And so it makes sense to split. So geographically, quite often you split. You've got a North American division and you have your European division. It can be split also on products. So typically large vehicle manufacturers will split between cars and commercial vehicles. So cars and lorries basically, because the methods of manufacturing are quite separate, probably in separate factories. The way you sell and the competition is quite separate. The way these purchases are going to be financed by your customers is going to be quite separate. Again, expertise is what you need. And finally, sometimes they are divisionalized on the basis of customers. So there can sometimes be divisions where one division sells to what you might call profit-seeking organizations, other businesses, and another division sells just to governments because the process of winning government contracts can be very specialized. Or one division sells to other businesses, your B2B, business to business, because you tend to be selling in bulk to these people and maybe slightly different products or different specifications. But if you're selling to the public, the marketing is quite different, the outlets are going to be quite different, and maybe the products are going to be slightly different as well. But again, specialization is the key. And although there can be certain disadvantages in going divisionalized, in other words, you've got 2 finance departments perhaps doubling up some of the work, 2 sales departments doubling up some of the wages and so on. The hope is that the advantages coming from this specialization outweigh the extra costs coming from duplication. The final structure to look at is really the matrix structure. And this gets away from what we've had so far, what we've had so far is what you have called unity of command. I can show it better up on one of these here. Unity of command means that any subordinate only has one boss. And historically, or classically, this was thought to be the proper way to manage, that any person should only have one boss, that is more than one, people to shout at you. What you don't want is 2 bosses shouting at you. A matrix structure has got away from that. So here, for example, we have a quality control person, and this person has got dual responsibility. They've been assigned to a project here, Project B, and we have a Project B manager, but they're also part of the quality control department, and that's a speciality, and they're responsible to quality control manager. Now you can see how this person will come under a bit of pressure. Let's say the project is falling behind in time. They will come under pressure from the project B manager to hurry up, cut out some of these quality control tasks because I need to finish this on time, but also coming under a bit of pressure from the quality control manager saying, no, do all the tests because we don't want to release a product or sign off a building if it's unsafe. And you've got these two people applying pressure to this person here, which is the reason why matrix management was thought to be unfair. However, I think this happens anyway. I think even if you have the conventional kind of functional structure, I think although you've got your proper boss here, I think you get pressure from other places. And I think what happens in this matrix structure is actually simply more honest. You can go to your managers and say, look, here is the structure of the organization. You will see that me, the most junior person here, have responsibilities to you, have responsibilities to you. I know the project is going behind time, but rather than you both kind of shouting at me and me listening to the person who shouts louder or listening to the person that I'm more frightened of, why don't you two, knowing the structure's in place, why don't you two more senior people communicate? Why don't you get together and sort out what has to be happened in this project that's going behind time? Maybe the quality control manager will to say, well, you can cut some of the tests without really any danger, and the project B manager says, well, okay, I'll let it go a week over, we can live with a week over, maybe we'll get to a compromise, because what we want out of this is a win-win. We want our client to be happy with a project coming in on time, but also we want the output, the result of the project, to be safe and to be of the right quality. There's no point in being late, there's no point in producing rubbish, we want win-win. And these people can be encouraged to communicate, and when they get to the answer, then they can tell this poor person in the middle here what their priorities actually are. Very useful for project management, this matrix structure. Next topic we look at is an idea of a writer called Mintzberg, a very famous management writer, who talked about organizational configurations, parts of an organization, and in particular he talked about how the sizes or influences of these parts would change depending on the nature of the organization. And really, he said there were 5 parts in the organization. Strategic apex. So think of apex. Apex is the top. Think of strategy. Strategy is the long-term planning of the organization. So these are people at the top of the organization thinking about long-term planning. Essentially, it's top management of the board of directors. Then he had the middle line. Think of the middle line as a middle management stretching from the strategic apex down. It's like the scalar chain, as we called it. And then we have the operating core. These are basically the workers, the people who operate the machines, if you like, or the people who are actually responsible for delivering the services. And then we have support. Things like IT, maybe quality control could be support. The accounting department is support. Maybe the human resources department is support. And then he had something, and this is what people find the hardest kind of part of the configuration to grasp, something which he called a technostructure. Now notice that support wasn't a single department. Support was a function carried out by many different departments: IT, accounting, human resources or personnel, maybe quality control and so on. It was a function, not a department. Similarly, technostructure is a kind of function, not a department. There is no technostructure department. But this is a function which basically devises and imposes standards, writes procedures, manuals, writes handbooks and so on. So in large organisations you've got lots and lots of rules and regulations about health and safety. You tend to have lots of rules and regulations about how employees should behave, your entitlement to sick pay and to holidays, what the disciplinary procedures are, and so on. And you, in certainly manufacturing organisations, you have got really a very strict procedural manual about how quality is to be controlled and tested and enforced and so on. And this is all to do with the technostructure. And he said these vary in size and importance. And the first one we can talk about is the machine bureaucracy. Now think of machine bureaucracy, think of machine and think of mass production. Like a big car manufacturer, like Nissan, say. So here you have the board of Nissan thinking where a car is going to be in the next 10 years, you know, and they'll be thinking presumably things like a lot of electric or hybrid cars is what we're going to be needing, and so on there. But they've got their eyes on the longer term future. Then you've got all your middle managers in a company like Nissan. There'll be quite a lot of them there because it's a big organisation. Lots of production, lots of ordering, lots of sales, etc., etc., lots of design. It's quite complex, so quite a long middle line. Then you have, basically, you can think of these as the people in the factories, the operating core. You can see the support staff is going to be high. A lot of accounting, a lot of IT, a lot of human resources management, recruiting, training, etc., etc., is going to be in a large organisation. And the technostructure will also be very large, because in a large manufacturing organisation you have to be absolutely precise about health and safety. You have to be absolutely precise about how employees should behave, discipline, grievance, pay rates, appraisal interviews, all sorts of stuff in there. It's important that they can make cars absolutely consistently, therefore the quality control procedures has to be absolutely fine and laid down as well. So it's a very kind of bureaucratic organisation. Think of the technostructure as creating the bureaucratic feel of the organisation. At the other extreme you have what's called a simple structure. And basically a simple structure has got two people. It's got the boss and its workers. This is like a new small organisation. It's so small it maybe only needs the boss and the workers. Maybe it's got one intermediate manager in there. It hasn't developed an accounting department or an IT department. There is basically no bureaucracy there. It's the boss makes stuff up as he goes along. So there is no kind of technostructure to speak about. It will gradually evolve perhaps into something that looks more like the machine configuration. The third structure to look at is where are we? Is this one here? What's called the professional bureaucracy. This is the professional bureaucracy, and by professional bureaucracy, Mintzberg meant something like, say, in a firm of accountants, or maybe a firm of lawyers. That's what he meant by professionals. What do we see in this structure here? Well, the things to look out for are particularly that this middle line is short and that the technostructure is very small. Now, if you went to a firm of accountants, even a big firm like, say, PricewaterhouseCoopers or KPMG, the number of layers in that organisation is actually relatively small between partners at the top and relatively junior people at the bottom. We're all going out and doing the audits. And it is small because every audit is different. When an audit is performed, the person doing the audit will take the audit file to the partner, to the person at the top, and go through it with them. Because the person at the top who's going to be signing off the audit wants to know from the person who did the work what the problems were. You see, in the machine bureaucracy, in the mass production, they really win very often by mass production. Everything's the same. In a professional organization, they win by giving a tailored service to every client, and therefore the people at the top need to keep an eye on what's going on. Also, the opportunities for imposing standard procedures and approaches to a job is different. Certainly you can have standard documentation for an audit or for a legal case, but every legal case is going to be different witnesses, different evidence, and so on there, different set of circumstances. So actually the influence of the technical structure is much more limited. You can't say and lay down in a manual how every legal case is to progress. It has to be tailored. And so their influence is much less. And finally there is the divisional structure, and all we have here, if you look at it, is within each of the division you've got your own little structure. So these could be little subsidiary companies, if you like, within an overall group which is there. You need to know what the components are in this. You need to know what the 5 components are. You maybe need to be able to describe and know how the size and influences of these components change under Mintzberg's ideas. Final thing we look at, I'm not going to say very much about it in the lecture, but you need to read it. It's what's called the contextual features which are going to be influencing the structure of an organization. So, for example, the technology. And the examples we have here is simply saying that IT, good IT, can allow information to be much more available to everybody within an organization. So if you have what's called a company intranet, it means that many people have access to a lot of information within a company. And this, in a way, facilitates both divisionalization, but facilitates better delegation. We said that if you are going to delegate, then the person doing the work has to be able to do their work almost unsupervised. It means they have to be better people. It means they have to be given access to information they need to carry on their task. If you have poor IT, it is actually harder to involve people further down the organization. They have not got the same ease of access to information they need, perhaps to respond quickly to changes in the marketplace. The environment. The example we've given here is a price competitive environment here. So a price competitive environment, many people competing and competing on price, and one where customers tend to buy on price. They tend to be influenced by the price of the goods and by the lower price ones and so on there. If you're going to win in that environment, you have to keep your prices down, and if you're going to make a profit, you have to keep your costs down. So you have to be very cost efficient. And one of the ways actually which you can get to be quite cost efficient is perhaps to go for a tall narrow structure. Not the structure where maybe the span of control in the middle is very narrow, but further down you want to have a kind of mass production. You don't want lots of communication up and down through the organization. You want what's called task specialization. You break the tasks down into typical production line. I do this, the next person does that, the next person does the next thing, and so on. And you just want it to be very repetitive and get really good at this simple task. That's how you get costs down. In, however, an organization which wins clients by giving a tailored sort of organization, a tailored sort of response, this is where you are providing unique services. A client comes to you and says, I need this. Then the sort of organizational structure you have there will work very well, perhaps in a tall, narrow structure, which is very good at repeating itself. Maybe what you need there is a wide, flat structure. Maybe what you need is only 4 layers between the top and the bottom of the organization, so that the client comes to somebody at the bottom of the organization, and then you can quickly organize and talk to people above you. Can we do this with the client? What resources do we need? We come to faster decisions and maybe better decisions. And finally, there is the culture of the organization. In some organizations, depending a little bit on who their employees are and what sort of background those employees have, some people like and expect to be told what to do. And if they're from that background, if they're from that mindset, then maybe they will work better in a tall, narrow organization where there tends to be a lot of kind of giving orders and obeying orders. Not a lot of questioning comes back up that organization at all. It's very, very hierarchical, very almost military. But some people like that because being told what to do and doing it relieves you a lot of decision making, takes a lot of risk out of the job. Other people from different backgrounds would simply hate that. They've gone to university and college, they've got good qualifications. The heart of many of these qualifications is being taught to think for yourself, maybe to challenge what people say, not just to blindly obey orders and so on there. If you put them into a tall, narrow structure and say, here's your instructions, just get on with it for the next month, they're going to rebel. They would much prefer the wide, narrow sort of organization where you're expected to interact with managers and bosses. Again, that's the sort of people you'd want to recruit in an organization which is dedicated to giving tailored products, tailored services to your customers.